My name is Sharon Dodua Otoo, and I've been living in Berlin for about 15 years. By now, I'm a writer. I came to Cologne yesterday because of an event which I took part in where I presented a text for the first time. Text is called Three Languages, where I look at three different languages that have something to do with me personally, which is Ga, English, and German. And so I read in public for the first time in my parents' first language, which is Ga. The language Ga is spoken in Ghana, but actually mostly in the capital of Ghana. So if you leave the capital, you won't see many people who speak Ga. It's the language of the Ga people who mostly live in the capital city of Ghana. I don't know how many people speak Ga, but it's also considered to be a language that's dying because the other language that many people know outside of Ghana is Twi. That's a language that many people in Ghana speak. And this language has become very dominant in Ghana. Because so many people speak it, then that's usually the first language that people start to talk with each other. And then maybe a few sentences later, they might realize actually both of their first languages is Ga. So Twi has become the main language even in the capital city among the people who live there. I think the question about whether languages are political or not is an interesting one. I would answer, unfortunately, yes. I think people are born and need to communicate, and whether they communicate in an audio language, English, German, French, Ga, or whether they use sign language, the main point is that we are in communication with each other and we have things that we need to share. And it shouldn't matter which language we use. I would even argue, even if we don't speak the same first languages, we still manage somehow to communicate with each other, right? But then we live in societies where there are dominant languages and languages that are considered to be educated or, important for world commerce or to enjoy media or such. And of course, English is the dominant language in that sphere. And then you even have a leaning towards US American English. And then every other language kind of has a ranking. And I think in Germany, English is a very important language for people who don't speak German as their first language. And maybe you can get away with being a French speaker in Germany. I think that's okay. And then after that, it gets a bit tricky. And then if you speak Turkish or Arabic, then you're lost. So for people to use their own languages from their own cultures, from their parents and families, from non-German countries, and still create in those languages, write songs, write poetry, write novels, I think it's a very political act, yes. That would have happened probably around the time that I started to realize that colonialism was even a thing. And when I say that, I mean, I knew about colonialism relatively early from school, but I didn't know about it in terms of what it actually did to my family and did to me politically, let's say. The Commonwealth is a vocabulary that I used often. Yeah, Ghana is a Commonwealth country, and it was something I was even proud of, I would say. And my mum is a big fan of royalty. Senturan talked yesterday about his mother wearing, a necklace with the Queen and Prince Philip, and that could have been my mother also, right? So I think I was proud, that Ghana used to be part of the English collection of countries. But then at some point, and I would even say that was probably when I came to Germany, I became much more politicized and thought a lot more about what it meant to be Black as a political position. And then realized that, something really was stolen from me in terms of my identity, in terms of my history. I don't know much about my family in Ghana, very, very little. I don't speak the language fluently that my parents and my family speak back in Ghana. And that did a lot. Like, for example, when I met my grandparents in the 80s, we didn't converse. They didn't speak English. I didn't speak Ga. So it was a problem. I don't hate the English language. I don't hate England either. Of course, I see the history, the colonial history, is very problematic, of course, and equally as infuriating is the fact that there's so much gaslighting around the history of colonialism that people are told, oh, that was so far away, or everything's fine now. The problems that African countries have nothing to do with colonialism. That drives me it makes me so furious. So that is annoying. By now, English is a language that many people in various African countries and in the African diaspora use it as a language to communicate with each other across borders. We use it culturally. We create our own traditions in English. There are different flavors of English. So I think I would like to say that English has been reclaimed in a way. Like, it's not just like the Queen's English or something like this. It's a language that we've taken and reworked to use. I mean, there's rap music. There's so many things that happen using English that I don't associate it anymore with dominance. Of course, there is still dominance, but I think there's a lot of liberation as well. I find this question about whether my writing or writing in general is political, I find that also a very interesting question. It seems to me that only certain people are asked this question and certain other people are just artists. And I'm just like interested in that. Also, I get asked this question and it makes sense because I explicitly say I'm also a political activist, and I use my writing and my activism. They're very tightly interlinked. I don't separate them, actually. So I get that. And I also found Centuran's answer yesterday to the same question quite interesting. If I remember correctly, Centuran said he is in any case a politicized subject. So the question doesn't really arise for him. And just the same, he writes poetry, and that's his aim, and he wants to write poetry and wants to be judged on those terms. So all of that can be true at the same time. I'd like to also add that in a situation, in a society where there are these, so much violence, so much discrimination, power imbalances, if we know this and we artists are in a position to be able to reflect on it publicly, like anyone can reflect on these things, right? But artists are especially artists that are interviewed or have access to stages and give their readings in front of many people. They have a different position then when they choose to reflect on these things or choose not to reflect on these things. And I find that a political act. To make a decision to say, I'm just an artist, I'm not going to do anything, especially if you're not from a marginalized position, I think that is a political position. I have two answers to the question why I write. The first answer is because I needed to. So I started to write when I was very young. I told stories before I could write. I used to share a bedroom with my brother and sister, so I would just talk. These poor people had to listen to my stories. But then at some point I started to write them down. I wrote short stories, poems, love songs. And then, and I think looking back, my point was I was trying to make sense of what I was experiencing, because I think what I was experiencing was very confusing. I was being told, of course, you're English and you belong to England and everything is fine, no discrimination. But I was experiencing something completely different. I was told we're all the same, we don't see color or what have you. But I was experiencing that at home. My parents had established this mini Ghana, and then everywhere else, nobody was being raised like I was. So I was like, this isn't true. We're not all the same. And I wrote to try to make sense of that. And writing helped me to process stuff. And that was when I didn't really think that I would be not even a famous writer, a published writer. I thought I was just writing for myself and maybe my sister who had similar questions. And then the second reason I write is because when I moved to Germany, I became very active in the Black German movement. And at some point I was a single parent and organizing events, organizing demonstrations, something. I was constantly outside of the home and my children were eating beans on toast and killing things on a computer game. It's like, that doesn't make sense. So I decided that I would like to try to combine my activism more with, so make it more compatible with my family life. And I thought writing was a good way to do that. I was anyway writing, as I said. And I thought it would be good to try to and continue my activism in a way that helped me as well, helped me and my children. And I decided to write stories that activists would like to read. We don't only want to be saving the world. We sometimes want to sit on our sofa and just enjoy a nice story where Black people are the main protagonists, and they're not described in an insulting way using discriminatory language and such. So that was something I did. I wrote my first 2 novellas where the main character is a Black mother, and I tried to use humor and satire to explore these different subjects. And then the move from writing in English, which I started off doing, to writing in German, that was just circumstance. I was asked to write a short text, and I asked if I could do a short story, and then I did that. And then by chance, this story was picked for a competition. I won the prize for that competition. The rest is history, as they say. So yeah, started off as a necessity. And then it became a way to be active still in these discourse, but using different tools. I think everybody can be active, and everyone can choose to use different tools to do their activism. And yeah, and by now it's my profession. I think literature can change the world. I really do. And maybe I'm naive, but I think changing the world has different possibilities. It's not just about animating thousands of people to go on the street. That's not what I mean when I say change the world. I think, for example, the fact that my favorite writer, Toni Morrison, wrote a book about an enslaved woman. So this is Beloved, the first novel I read of Toni Morrison. As far as I understand, this was the first time that somebody had written a novel about enslaved people, where the enslaved person wasn't just an example of someone who was poor and we had to have empathy with them and feel bad and we need to be told explicitly that slavery is wrong. This wasn't Toni Morrison's interest. So we've got novels like Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I haven't read. I don't want to diss this novel, but it was definitely written with a specific audience in mind. And Toni Morrison said, I don't think Uncle Tom would have read this novel. This novel wasn't for Uncle Tom, right? And Toni Morrison wanted to write for people like Uncle Tom, I would say. Wanted to write for people like me, people who are descendants of enslaved people. And her interest wasn't to depict two-dimensional people who were either perfect or imperfect or, suffering or actually just oppressive. She wanted to show complicated figures. She wanted to show people. I think people are complicated and complex and have both possibilities. People can be both marginalized and privileged at the same time. And I think that did a lot to me and with me and my imagination of who I am and what is possible for me to achieve. And also, how far would I be prepared to go to, say, protect my children from being enslaved? What do I imagine freedom to be? What do I imagine resistance to be? And I think that book did a lot to change me. And I think then I was also influenced to want to, write literature that can do the same for other people. And those are also changes. Like, I think there's this image of a pebble being dropped in the river and then the ripples going out. I think that's what literature does. And I think that's what I wish more writers would take seriously. I think there are writers who say, I think Peter Handke thinks, literature is just, art and I'm just doing art. But then the fact that he was awarded the Nobel Prize meant something to people who felt negatively affected by the literature he'd produced. So, I think that this is something that needs to be done. I don't want to say there's an easy answer. I don't want to say he shouldn't have been given the Nobel Prize. I don't know. But I just want to say it isn't something that can be ignored. It has an effect. It has a signal, and we should take that seriously.